Would you kill for a bucket? Not a treasure chest, not a sacred relic, but a plain wooden bucket used to draw water from a well. In 1325, two Italian cities, Modena and Bologna, went to war over exactly that. What started as a prank, a group of soldiers stealing a bucket as a taunt, spiraled into a bloody conflict that left 2,000 men dead. This is the story of the War of the Oaken Bucket, a bizarre chapter in history where pride and rivalry turned a joke into a massacre. It's absurd, it's tragic, and it's true. Stick with me, because this tale of a bucket will leave you questioning how far human ego can go. In the early 14th century, Italy was not a unified nation, but a patchwork of city-states, each fiercely independent and often at odds with its neighbors. By 1325, the region of Emilia-Romagna in northern Italy was a hotbed of rivalry between two wealthy and powerful cities, Modena and Bologna. These weren't just towns, they were thriving centers of trade, culture, and power, each with its own government, army, and sense of pride. Modena, with its Romanesque cathedral and growing textile industry, was loyal to the Holy Roman Emperor, aligning with the Ghibelline faction. Bologna, home to one of Europe's oldest universities and a hub of commerce, sided with the Pope and the Guelph faction. These allegiances weren't just political, they were deeply personal, fueling a feud that had simmered for centuries. The conflict between Guelphs and Ghibellines was more than a power struggle. It was a way of life. The Guelphs, supporting the papacy, believed in the church's authority over secular rulers, while the Ghibellines backed the emperor's claim to dominate both church and state. This ideological divide split families, neighborhoods, and entire cities, turning neighbors into enemies. Modena and Bologna, just 40 kilometers apart, were natural rivals, where proximity breeding contempt. Disputes over borders, trade routes, and water rights vital in a region crisscrossed by rivers kept tensions high. Skirmishes were common, and insults were traded as freely as goods in their bustling markets. Life in 1325 was harsh, even in prosperous cities. Most people were farmers or artisans, toiling under the shadow of feudal lords and city magistrates. Armies were made up of local militias, knights, and mercenaries, often poorly trained but fiercely loyal to their city's banner. Weapons were crude swords, spears, crossbows, and early cannons, yet deadly in the hands of men driven by honor or vengeance. A single slight, like stealing livestock or trespassing on disputed land, could spark violence. Honor was everything, and pride was a currency worth more than gold. To insult a city was to insult every man, woman, and child within its walls. Bologna, with its grand towers and thriving university, saw itself as superior, a beacon of learning and PayPal loyalty. Modena, smaller but scrappy, resented Bologna's arrogance and clung to its imperial ties. The two cities had clashed before over everything from farmland to political influence. But nothing prepared them for what was coming. In this world of fragile alliances and hair-trigger tempers, a single act of defiance could ignite a firestorm. And that's exactly what happened when a group of Modena's soldiers, likely drunk on bravado, decided to pull a stunt that would echo through history. They didn't steal gold or burn a village, they stole a bucket from a well in Bologna. What should have been a prank became the spark for a war that would claim thousands of lives, proving that, in a world ruled by pride, even the smallest slight could lead to catastrophe. This story has no single hero, no lone figure to carry the weight of the tale. Instead, the protagonist is a collective, the rival cities of Modena and Bologna, their people, and the reckless pride that drove them to war over a bucket. In 1325, these city-states were more than just places. They were living entities, pulsing with the ambitions, fears, and fury of their citizens. To understand the War of the Oaken Bucket, we must meet the men and women of these cities, the soldiers who fought. The leaders who fanned the flames and the ordinary folk caught in the crossfire of a feud that turned a prank into a bloodbath. Modena was a gritty, determined city of about 20,000. Its streets lined with workshops, and its skyline crowned by the Romanesque Tor Ghirlandina. Its people were artisans, merchants, and farmers, fiercely loyal to their Ghibelline cause and the Holy Roman Emperor. Leading Modena was the powerful Passerino Bonacolsi, a cunning nobleman who ruled with an iron grip and a chip on his shoulder. He saw Bologna's wealth and influence as an insult to Modena's honor, and his ambition fueled the city's defiance. The average Modenese soldier was no knight in shining armor. Think of Giovanni, tanner's son turned militiaman, barely 20, wielding a rusty sword and a grudge against Bologna's smug scholars. These were men who fought not for glory but for their city's name, men who'd rather die than see Modena mocked. Bologna, with its 50,000 inhabitants, was grander, its skyline spiked with medieval towers built by wealthy families vying for prestige. Home to Europe's oldest university, it drew scholars from across the continent, fostering an air of intellectual superiority. The city's Guelph loyalty to the Pope made it a target for imperial-aligned rivals like Modena. Bologna's leaders, a council of magistrates and wealthy merchants, were headed by figures like Ugolino Gonzaga, a diplomat skilled in rhetoric but quick to anger when Bologna's honor was questioned. Soldiers, like Matteo, a baker's apprentice drafted into the militia, were ordinary men armed with spears and crossbows, driven by loyalty to their city's papal cause. Bologna's citizens, students, traders, priests saw themselves as defenders of a higher ideal, but they weren't above throwing punches in a tavern brawl over a slight. Life in both cities was a grind. Most people lived hand-to-mouth, their days filled with labor spinning wool, tending crops, or hauling goods. Yet pride bound them together. In Modena, a man like Giovanni might spend his evenings in a smoky tavern, boasting about his city's defiance of Bologna's bookish snobs. In Bologna, Matteo might overhear students mocking Modena's backwater ways, fueling his resolve to prove his city's strength. Honor was everything, and insults were personal. A stolen bucket wasn't just a prank, it was a slap in the face, a challenge to the very identity of the city. The rivalry between Modena and Bologna had deep roots, stretching back centuries to disputes over land, water, and influence. By 1325, the tension was a powder keg. Modena resented Bologna's wealth and papal favor. Bologna scorned Modena's imperial allegiance and scrappy attitude. Small incidents, stolen livestock, border raids kept the feud alive, but nothing had yet sparked open war. The people of both cities were primed for conflict, their leaders eager to flex their power. When Modena's soldiers crept into Bologna under cover of night and stole a wooden bucket from a public well, they didn't just take an object, they lit a match in a city ready to burn. This collective protagonist, driven by pride and blinded by rivalry, was about to march into a war that would stain the fields of Emilia-Romagna with blood. The summer of 1325 in Emilia-Romagna was thick with humidity and unrest. It's the kind of season where tempers flared like dry tinder under the relentless sun. Modena and Bologna, those eternal rivals separated by just a day's march, had been trading barbs and border skirmishes for months. Modena's Ghibelline soldiers, loyal to the emperor, patrolled their frontiers with a swagger, while Bologna's Guelph forces, backed by papal authority, guarded theirs with equal vigilance. It was a powder keg of pride, politics, and petty grievances, waiting for a spark. That spark came not from a grand declaration of war or a territorial invasion, but from something utterly ridiculous: a wooden bucket. Picture the scene. A moonless night in late July, the air buzzing with cicadas and the distant rumble of a summer storm. A band of Modena soldiers, perhaps a dozen young men, fueled by cheap wine and bravado, slipped across the border into Bologna's territory. They weren't there to raid a village or ambush a patrol. Their mission was a prank, a taunt meant to humiliate their pompous neighbors. At the heart of Bologna stood a communal well, a vital source of water for the city's residents. Hanging from its rope was a simple oaken bucket, weathered and unremarkable, used daily by townsfolk to quench their thirst. To the Modenza, it was the perfect symbol of Bologna's everyday arrogance. Steal it, and you'd steal a piece of their dignity. The ringleader, let's imagine him as a cocky sergeant named Lorenzo, whispered orders to his men as they crouched in the shadows of Bologna's towering walls. Quick and quiet, he hissed, his eyes gleaming with mischief. They crept forward, hearts pounding, not from fear of death, but from the thrill of the dare. One soldier, nimble as a cat, scaled the well's stone rim, untied the bucket, and lowered it into waiting hands. A muffled laugh escaped as they bundled it under a cloak. No alarm sounded, no guards spotted them. They melted back into the night, bucket in tow, racing toward Modena with their trophy. By dawn, they were home, parading the stolen bucket through Modena streets, like conquerors returning from battle. Cheers erupted in taverns, and the bucket was hoisted atop a pole in the city square, a mocking emblem of Modena's wit over Bologna's might. Word spread like wildfire. In Bologna, the missing bucket was discovered at first light by a sleepy washerwoman, who found only a frayed rope dangling into the depths. Confusion turned to outrage as rumors flew. Modenese thieves had struck. The city's magistrates convened in the Palazzo di Curzio, their faces flushed with indignation. "This is no mere theft," thundered one counselor, slamming his fist on the table. "It's an insult to our sovereignty, a challenge to our honor." Bologna's leaders, already bristling from recent border disputes, saw the act as a deliberate provocation. Whispers in the university halls and marketplaces painted Modena as barbaric upstarts, unfit to challenge a city of scholars and saints. The Guelph faction, ever eager to assert papal supremacy, demanded retribution. Messengers were dispatched to allied cities, calling for support against this affront. Back in Modena, Passerino Bonacalzi, the city's lord chuckled at first. The bucket became a joke, a symbol of Modena's cleverness. But as Bologna's fury grew, so did the stakes. Spies reported that Bologna was mobilizing its militia, rallying knights and mercenaries under the papal banner. What started as a lark now threatened to engulf both cities in war. Bonacalzi, sensing an opportunity to humble his rival, ordered his forces to prepare. If they want their bucket back, he declared to his captains, let them come and take it with steel. Modena streets filled with the clang of blacksmiths forging weapons, and young men like Giovanni, the tanner's son, were drilled in formation, their laughter giving way to grim determination. Tensions escalated rapidly. Bologna's army, numbering around 32,000, including infantry, cavalry, and crossbowmen, marched toward Modena, their banners fluttering with the Guelph eagle. Led by commanders versed in siege warfare, they aimed to crush the insult swiftly. Modena responded with 7,000 men, a smaller but fiercely defensive force, bolstered by Ghibelline allies from nearby cities. The two armies converged at Zappolino, a dusty plain midway between the cities, on a sweltering August day. The air was thick with dust and anticipation as lines formed Bologna's vast host arrayed in gleaming armor. Modena's compact ranks dug in behind makeshift barriers. The battle erupted at midday, a chaotic clash of steel and screams. Bologna's superior numbers should have overwhelmed Modena, but hubris proved their undoing. Their commanders, overconfident, launched disorganized charges, while Modena's forces held firm, their crossbows raining death from elevated positions. Knights clashed in the center, swords hacking through shields, horses rearing in panic. Blood soaked the earth as men felled Giovanni, fighting for Modena, parried a Bolognese spear, only to see his comrade cut down beside him. Matteo, in Bologna's ranks, charged with righteous fury, his baker's hands now gripping a bloodied pike. The fighting raged for hours, the sun beating down mercilessly, turning the field into a slaughterhouse. Modena's discipline won the day. In a decisive counterattack, their cavalry flanked Bologna's lines, shattering their formation. Panic spread through the Guelph ranks, and what began as a retreat turned into a rout. Bologna's army fled, leaving behind 2,000 dead and wounded knights trampled underfoot, infantrymen cut down in flight. Modena lost only a handful, their victory as stunning as it was improbable. As the sun set, Modena soldiers scavenged the field, claiming weapons, armor, and, ironically, another bucket from Bologna's camp, which they paraded triumphantly back home. This was the turning point. A prank had become a war, and a single battle had humiliated Bologna while elevating Modena's legend. The stolen bucket, now bloodied by association, was no longer a joke, but a relic of carnage. Both cities would never be the same, their rivalry etched deeper by the graves at Zappolino. What followed was a fragile peace, but the scars of that day lingered. A testament to how fragile the line between folly and tragedy truly is. The truce brokered in early 1326 brought an uneasy halt to the War of the Oaken Bucket, but its echoes reverberated through the hills of Emilia-Romagna for decades, shaping the fates of Modena and Bologna in ways both triumphant and tragic. What began as an absurd theft had morphed into a conflict that claimed over 2,000 lives, devastated economies, and deepened the scars of rivalry between the two city-states. Yet, in the annals of history, this war occupies a peculiar place, celebrated by some as a quirky footnote, dismissed by others as a senseless folly, and largely erased from broader narratives of medieval Italy. The outcome was no clear victor emerging unscathed, but rather a patchwork of concessions, lingering grudges, and lessons half-learned, where pride continued to overshadow reason. For Modena, the war's end was a bittersweet vindication. Serino Bonacolsi, the Ghibelline lord who had rallied his smaller force to a miraculous victory at Zappolino, emerged as a local legend. The city retained the infamous Oaken Bucket, enshrining it in the Torre della Ghirlandina as a trophy of defiance. Celebrations filled the streets, feasts were held, ballads composed praising the Bucket Brigade, and the artifact became a symbol of Modenese ingenuity over Bolognese arrogance. Economically, Modena gained minor territorial concessions along the border, including control over disputed farmlands that bolstered their grain supplies. Giovanni, the tanner's son and battle survivor, found himself honored in his community a medal pinned to his chest, a small plot of land granted for his valor. He married, started a family, and passed down tales of the war to his children, framing it as a righteous stand against bullies. Yet the victory came at a steep price. Modena's treasury was depleted from months of warfare, taxes remained high, and the population mourned their dead hundreds buried in hasty graves outside the city walls. Internal divisions festered. Some Ghibelline factions accused Bonacolsi of prolonging the conflict for personal glory, leading to whispers of conspiracy that would later contribute to his downfall in 1327. When he was overthrown in a coup, Bologna, on the other hand, grappled with the sting of defeat and the burden of reconstruction. The Guelph Council, humiliated by the rout at Zappolino and the failed siege of Modena, faced public backlash. Magistrates were ousted, replaced by more hawkish leaders who vowed to rebuild the city's military might. The papal intervention that enforced the truce extracted promises of non-aggression. But Bologna ceded no major territory, only minor border adjustments and reparations that barely covered their losses. The university, a beacon of the city's prestige, suffered as scholars fled during the unrest, and trade routes disrupted by the war took years to recover. Matteo, the baker's apprentice, scarred by battle, returned to his ovens with a limp and a hardened heart. He prospered modestly, expanding his shop with loans from Guelph bankers. But the war haunted him nightmares of the retreat, guilt over comrades left behind. Bologna's recognition of the war was muted. Official chronicles downplayed the Bucket's role, framing the conflict as a noble defense against imperial aggression. Memorials were erected for the fallen, but the narrative shifted blame to Modena's barbarism, erasing the prank's absurdity to preserve dignity. Socially, the city tightened its grip. Suspected Ghibelline sympathizers were exiled, and alliances with Florence and the papacy were strengthened to prevent future humiliations. Historically, the War of the Oaken Bucket faded into obscurity, recognized more for its eccentricity than its impact. Chroniclers like Matteo Grifoni in Bologna and Giovanni Villani in Florence recorded the events, but often with a tone of bemusement or disdain. The bucket itself became a relic, displayed in Modena's Civic Museum to this day, drawing curious tourists who marvel at the folly. In the broader tapestry of 14th century Italy, the war was overshadowed by larger conflicts, the ongoing Guelph-Ghibelline struggles. The Black Death's arrival in 1348, and the rise of powerful signori like the Visconti in Milan, Modena's victory proved fleeting. By the 15th century, the city fell under Osten's rule, its independence eroded. Bologna, resilient as ever, maintained its papal ties and cultural prominence. But the war's memory was selectively erased taught in schools as a cautionary tale of pride. Yet stripped of details that might embarrass the city's legacy, the war's erasure extended to its human cost. The 2,000 dead knights, militiamen, mercenaries were largely forgotten, their names lost to time, except in family lore. Widows and orphans struggled in anonymity, their pleas for aid buried in municipal records. Yet in quiet ways, the conflict influenced the region. Border fortifications improved. Diplomatic channels between city-states expanded, and a wary peace held for years. Recognition came belatedly in modern times. Historians like Philip Jones in the 20th century highlighted it as an example of medieval microwars, where local egos trumped national interests. Today, reenactments in Zappolino draw crowds, blending education with entertainment, and the bucket stands as a UNESCO-recognized symbol of quirky heritage. In current times, story resonates amid global conflicts, sparked by seemingly trivial triggers, border disputes, cultural insults, or resource grabs. The War of the Oaken Bucket reminds us that history often erases the individual suffering behind grand narratives, reducing wars to anecdotes while the dead remain silent. Modena and Bologna, now peaceful neighbors in unified Italy, share a region famed for balsamic vinegar and Ferrari. But the bucket's shadow lingers as a whisper of what pride can rot. The outcome was no glorious resolution, but a sobering stalemate where both sides claimed victory, yet all paid the price. The War of the Oaken Bucket sounds like a tale spun for laughs, a medieval feud over a stolen bucket, absurd enough to belong in a tavern song? Yet, beneath the absurdity lies a grim truth. 2,000 men died, families were shattered, and 2 cities bled for pride over a wooden pail. Modena and Bologna, locked in their Guelph-Ghibelline rivalry, turned a prank into a massacre, proving how quickly ego can escalate into bloodshed. This wasn't a war for survival or freedom. It was a clash of honor, where neither side could back down without losing face. The bucket, now gathering dust in Modena's museum, stands as a relic of human folly. A reminder that even the smallest slight can ignite catastrophe when pride rules over reason. Consider Giovanni, the tanner's son, and Matteo, the baker's apprentice. Ordinary men swept into a conflict they didn't choose, their struggles surviving battle, rebuilding lives. Carrying scars, mirror the countless unnamed victims of wars sparked by trivial causes. History often forgets these individuals, reducing them to numbers in chronicles, but their stories ground us. The War of the Oaken Bucket asks us to reflect. How many modern conflicts, from diplomatic spats to outright wars, begin with a spark as mundane as a bucket, a misspoken word, a cultural insult, a disputed border? Any can spiral when pride overrides restraint? Today, as we navigate a world of escalating tensions, this obscure war offers a timeless lesson. It warns us to question the cost of vengeance, to weigh the value of honor against human lives. Modena and Bologna eventually found peace, but only after graves were filled and economies crippled. Their story urges us to pause, to seek dialogue over swords, to laugh off slights rather than let them fester. As one Modenese chronicler wrote centuries later, "Better to share a well than to die for its bucket." Let's carry that wisdom forward, remembering that history's strangest wars often hold its sharpest truths. The War of the Oaken Bucket is more than a quirky tale from a distant past. A mirror reflecting the fragility of peace and the cost of pride. The story of Modena and Bologna, of 2,000 lives lost over a stolen bucket, leaves us with a choice: to laugh at the absurdity, or to ponder its deeper warning. If this tale of human folly and resilience moved you, share it with someone who might see its echoes in today's world. Let's talk about the lessons history whispers to us from medieval Italy to now. And if you want more stories where the strange meets the profound, stick around, there's plenty more to uncover. Would you like me to start a new story, or is there anything else you'd like to explore with this one?